Well, thank you everyone again for being here this morning. So, the title of today's service is Spirit and Shadows, A Journey Through Samhain, All Souls, and Halloween. So here we are, again, Halloween week, a time when many celebrate with costumes, haunted houses, horror movies, and of course, trick-or-treating. One of the most popular secular holidays in the United States. Several years ago, I decided to give a service on this topic. And when I did, I realized that I had no idea what were the origins of Halloween. So I took a deep dive into exploring its history. And it originates back 2,000 years to a Celtic 3-day festival called Samhain. Now, how many of you are familiar with Samhain? You can raise your hand if you are. If you're not, you're going to learn a little bit about it today. Okay. So Samhain is Gaelic for November, and it also means summer's end. It was the celebration at the end of harvest, and it was also the beginning of the new year for the Celts. It was a magical time when the veil between death and life was understood to be at its thinnest, and the ghosts of the dead returned to walk the earth. So I wondered why I had never heard of Samhain. Well, it's really no wonder, because in our Christian culture, we're rarely exposed to belief systems that are considered pagan, except in a negative connotation in Hollywood. Hollywood, for example, would equate paganism, which this would be included in here, as a satanic worship, which is not true. The word pagan is a Latin word, which is actually, it's derived from this Latin word, which means pagus, which actually means people of the land, rural district, or ultimately just a farmer. So pagans were farmers. But you know how many religions evolved, they had to make somebody that wasn't part of the group not as appealing or the bad guy. So there we went with the term pagan and the stories that we've been exposed to. It was used at the end, the word pagan was used at the end of the Roman Empire to describe those that did not practice monotheism. And monotheistic religions are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Others were pagans. So here we are, a liberal religious community, and in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning, it would behoove us to dig a little deeper into Samhain and also into the human yearning to transverse that veil between our side and those on the other. So what is Samhain? A little more about it. So in the Celtic calendar, this calendar is divided into two halves, the dark half and the light half. The beginning of the dark half is considered the new year. It's November 1st, and that is when the festival of Samhain begins. The light half begins at sunset on May 1st, which is the festival of Beltane, and that is the festival of the returning of the light. Both festivals are closely linked, but Samhain is the most important of the two. So in Samhain's transition from light to dark, it was a period where time and space became permeable. And so spirits not only of the dead, but of the past and of other realities could wander into our reality. And also humans could wander out of our reality and get lost somehow in the other world as well. So that veil was at its thinnest, and the living and dead could commingle for this time, these few days. And it's ultimately the root of all Halloween celebrations that have come to exist now. As in all turning points in the Celtic year, ancient lore tells us that the gods drew close to earth on Samhain, as did the demons and ancestors. And to commemorate this event, the Druids, who were the Celtic shamans and priests, they built these gigantic sacred bonfires. And the people of the town would gather crops to burn as a sacrifice, offer animal sacrifices, and they would do this to the Celtic gods and deities. They also offered personal prayers in the form of objects, symbolizing their wishes and desires for the year to come, and those would also get thrown in the Samhain fire. Extensive preparations were made for sharing a communal feast during Samhain, which would include their departed ancestors as their guests. And they wanted to make sure that their ancestors were able to come and go freely into their homes. So they would leave their doors and windows unlocked, unlatched. And a special cake was made exclusively for the ancestors' consumption, along with other foods that were set aside for just them. This had to be left untouched by any mortal hand during the duration period, because if you ate that food, it was considered sacrilege, and you would be condemned to be a hungry spirit after you died, and would be forever banned from sharing a Samhain feast. So beyond the great feast, the dead would also need to be entertained when they were invited back. And customs evolved from one Celtic nation to another. But in general, young children, people played games that were associated with rituals, and the elders would review the events of the past year for the benefit of those who had passed on so they could hear. And this was believed to encourage the dead to continue to take an interest into the affairs of the living. So during this celebration, the Celts also wore costumes, and some of these consisted of animal heads. And they sometimes also carved pumpkins and gourds or turnips into scary masks. So the reasons they wore these masks was, though they were inviting their ancestors to visit, they wanted to make sure the demons stayed away. So they used these masks to trick the demons not to recognize them. And they were also, what they believed was that they believed that the demons were responsible for infant mortality, which was very high in those days, and also for crops that were not did not do well. If they had a poor crop, it was the demons that were responsible for it. Some of those demons were known as shees. You've heard the term banshee, right? Yeah. So a banshee was really a form of a fairy, but it wasn't like a Disney fairy. It wasn't like Tinkerbell. They were terrifying, they were gigantic, and they were dangerous and very unattractive, let's say. And they believed that these fairies, these shees or banshees, lived in what they called fairy mounds or fairy forts. They were these huge round mounds that if you travel to Ireland, you will see these in the countryside. And they believe that they were burial grounds, and some people believe that they were a portal to the underworld. Most Irish will not go anywhere near. They will not disturb these secular mounds. They leave them. They even actually build their highways around them. Isn't that something? And if they're on their fields, they just mow around them. Just leave them alone. Celts were thought that the presence of otherworldly spirits made it easier for the Druids and Celtic priests to make predictions about the future. So they were a people that were dependent on the volatile natural world. So these prophecies to them were a very important source of comfort during the long, dark winter. And at the end of these ceremonies, each one of the tribe, or each one of the Celtic folks of these towns, would take home some of that fire to ignite their own hearth, and it would feed the fire that they would continue to keep a flame lit throughout the winter. Samhain fires have continued to light up the countryside for centuries, and they still do. And in some areas, ashes from these bonfires were used to sprinkle on the fields as an additional form of protection. And as an added bonus, ash is a great way to help the soil to be more fertile. The truth is, what we know about Samhain is all passed on by word of mouth. But we can only guess that their bonfires drew one familiar Halloween icon, familiar yet frightening to many, the bat. Before there was electricity, there was only one way you would see a bat, and if it was in firelight outside, because the bats, the bugs would be drawn to the fire, and the bats, of course, would be drawn to the bugs. And for those celebrating Samhain, they felt that the bats were demons as well. So ultimately, how did Samhain come to our world and become Halloween? Well, like the Romans, like the Celtics, the Romans also had festivals for the dead as well. They had something called Limura. It was a festival that warded off the evil spirits of the dead. The Catholic Church in Europe frowned upon all of these pagan rituals and decided to create a feast of all martyrs that would coincide with that Roman date that was back in May. And ultimately, Pope Gregory III in the 8th century moved all these celebrations into one feast, and it was called All Saints' Day, and it was moved to November 1st. And they, as most of you know, many of what's come to known as the Catholic or Christian holidays were all based on pagan holidays and were created to engage people that were comfortable in their pagan roots to merge their belief system into what was Christian. It was a very calculated move. And in 993, All Souls' Day was instituted and spread quickly throughout the Christian world. And it was the day Catholics prayed for the souls that they believed remained stuck in purgatory. So ultimately, the Catholic Church, All Saints and All Souls Days were their way of bringing these all morphing into one holiday. And it's where our practice of leaving flowers, candles, and offerings for loved ones on their grave sites, which is where they all came from. So All Saints' Day was also known as All Hallows' Day, and Hallows, the meaning of Hallows means holy. So by the 16th century, the night before All Hallows' Day became All Hallows' Eve, or Halloween. So the tradition of trick-or-treating originated in All Souls' Day parades, where the poor citizens of England and Ireland would beg for food, often receiving something called soul cakes, these little round cakes, in exchange for prayers for the giver's dead relatives. All these little cakes, these were often referred to as souls and given out to the soulers. And this practice was continued on for many, many years. It was known as going Samhain. This tradition of going Samhain came to the United States with the wave of Irish immigrants during the potato famine. And they brought with them their holiday customs, which included going Samhain, including bobbing for apples and playing tricks on neighbors. And back in the early 1930s, it became really a time of vandalism. It became a problem. And it became a dangerous holiday where vandalism or trick-or-treating became an extortion deal. You give me something, I'll make sure nothing happens to you. But that was kind of twisted around where storekeepers and neighbors began giving treats to stop the children from engaging in this troublemaking. And the practice of Halloween came to life. And the practice of fortune telling and sharing stories about the dead continues since then. So as we move into our dark half of the year, there's an awareness. Here we are now in the cycles of life. And there's an awareness that goes on in nature that none of us can ignore. Nature is dying back right now, and it's time for harvest, and we become aware of the darkness and the cold to come, which we prepare for, just like the Celts did over 2,000 years ago. Today, as in the tradition of All Souls, Samhain, and Dia de los Muertos, we honor the yearning that many of us share across our different spiritual paths, a yearning to remain connected to those who have gone before. Whether we believe in afterlife or not, the desire to keep ones alive in our hearts, our minds, and spirits is a profound and deep human quality. No matter our beliefs, be they religious, agnostic, or atheist, we feel this need. It speaks to a fundamental truth about being human, that love has no end. And in closing, I invite you all to carry forward that love and gratitude for those who came before you. This week, remember them not just with sorrow for their absence, but with gratitude for the time we've had with them and for the riches that they've brought to our lives. And as we reap this harvest and give thanks for being alive, may you carry that love and gratitude into your daily life. May you keep their love alive by sharing it with those who cross your path. And may your light, in turn, guide others. Blessed be, and may it be so.
If you like this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video. Thank you.